Hello everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar, South America Grains and Oilseeds, Weather Production Outlooks and Trading Insights, presented by Refinitiv Agricultural and Weather Team. My name is Guilherme Marinelli, and I will be your host today. Joining me from the US is Ed Wallen, Dong Choi, and Orlando Rodriguez, who will bring updates on the impacts of the recent and upcoming weather extremes, as well as the weather trends for this next season in South America, and to forecast the main trading insights for 2022. Before we get started, just a bit of a housekeeping. You may submit your questions through the Q&A box, and it will be answered by the end of this presentation. Okay, so we have quite a bit of data to dig in, so why don't we get started? Ed, please, you may take the lead.
Thank you. Thanks for joining, everyone. And I can get things kicked off with the South America March through May weather outlook. Before I get into the forecast, I'll go ahead and talk about where things are at now heading into March. So these are daily soil moisture charts, and looking at center west, starting on the left-hand side. Looking at the yellow line, things obviously were quite dry last year up until October, when heavy rains picked up and really just stayed that way all the way through recently. So looking at the red line, which is this year, you can see we're at over 5-year highs regarding soil moisture in the center west. And then it's essentially the same exact story in the southeast, moving up to the top right. And then really the opposite in southern Brazil. You see, dryness really persisting from October through now, whereas in center west and southeast, rains picked up, but it just didn't happen in the south. So that's kind of where we're at now in Brazil. And moving to Argentina, we've got the same soil moisture chart on the left with an accumulated precipitation chart on the right-hand side. I'll start with that one. So this is going back into the past 60 days. So looking at early January, things were very dry. And then in the middle of January, we got that uptick in precipitation that brought things close to the normal line. And then it slowed down a bit from thereafter through February. And you do see that gap widening between the normal and the actual accumulated precipitation. You do see some heavy rains in the forecast here, so that will bring things back up to normal if those, not all the way to normal, but at least bridging that gap a little bit if that were to materialize. And then jumping back over to the soil moisture chart on the left, you kind of see how the impact was dealt there with that dry weather in early January, and then the spike in rainfall bringing up the soil moisture levels quite a bit towards the middle of the 5-year, the previous 5 years. And then that dryness in February, things started to dwindle, and that brought down the soil moisture levels. So if that rainfall were to materialize later, through the rest of this month and potentially in early March, you would see that jump up again. So moving into the short-term forecast, this is for temperatures across South America. It's really the same pattern that we're expecting over the next 10 to 15 days or so. Starting with a 1 to 5 day time frame on the left, we see an area of warmth in southern Brazil, Paraguay, and northeast Argentina. And really that should persist, that general pattern, through the next 15 days. As you can see, it's just getting weaker and weaker over time. And cooler conditions looking to take, hold back in Argentina and portions of Brazil there, except for the south. Moving on to precipitation, through the next 5 days, we see very dry weather in much of Brazil, especially the northeast and southeast and portions of the south there, as well as Paraguay. And then the opposite in Argentina, where we see heavy rainfall in the next 5 days. And there's like temperatures, this general pattern should persist with a little bit of shifting here and there. So through the 6 to 10 and 11 to 15 day time frame, we still see that dry weather in the center west and southeast Brazil, where in Paraguay and southern Brazil we see a bit more high rainfall, at least in the 6 to 10 day period, with a bit of a mixed pattern in Argentina during that time, with only heavy rainfall in the far north and then the southern area of the Pampas region being drier. But then in the 11 to 15-day time frame, the widespread rains looks to overspread much of Argentina. So that's kind of the short term. And then moving even further into the forecast, we could take a look at the EC extended run. And it shows the same pattern really persisting through the next 4 weeks. So that warmth in southern Brazil, Paraguay, cool conditions in much of Argentina, and then dry weather across nearly all of Brazil there except for the far south. And then that a bit of a mixed pattern in Argentina as far as rainfall goes. And then moving further into the forecast, we can start to look at the March through May timeframe. This is based off of our most recent ENSO outlook. So during that period, we are expecting La Nina to fade. So we do have an average sea surface temperature anomaly of negative 0.5 degrees Celsius during that time. And our analog analysis based off of that is here. So that is for temperatures. There wasn't much of a lean in either direction for most areas, maybe slight cool conditions in the coastal areas of the south and southeast of Brazil, maybe a little bit in Paraguay, and then maybe a little bit of warmth in Argentina. But more importantly, obviously, with the rainfall outlook to the right, we are expecting dry conditions in Goiás and spreading up through the northeast of Brazil, as well as Rio Grande do Sul and surrounding areas there, with slightly higher than normal rainfall in the Pampas region of Argentina. And we can go ahead and compare that to the latest EC seasonal outlook. So we can see here a trend towards dry conditions, starting on the left, working our way right through March, April, and May. Really the same picture over and over. So that is, at least this model specifically is anticipating dry conditions throughout most regions. And I'll toggle back and forth a little bit between our outlook and this outlook. So the highest level of confidence is going to be where those areas overlap. So really that would be in southern Brazil. So that is, dryness in southern Brazil is kind of the highest confidence we have in that forecast there. And the opposite is true in Argentina, where we're expecting wetter than normal conditions from our analog analysis, but the EC seasonal is hinting at dry conditions. So that does raise a little bit of uncertainty there. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're looking at those maps. And then pulling up the Antarctic Oscillation here is one more thing I want to highlight. So we've been in this persistent positive phase event for quite some time, except for earlier this month, it dropped into a negative phase for a bit. And looking at the red line on the left-hand side there, that's the that's the forecast. So we are expecting it to dip into a slight negative phase later, early in March, though it does look like it will rise back into a positive phase event thereafter. I'm not saying that it will, stay in a positive phase, but, just having that it has been in a, positive phase for quite some time, wanted to show the impacts of what that would be if it persisted into March through May. So anyone that's been looking at this through the past 3 months or so, you've probably been looking at the top right map here, which is the composite map for December through February. This shows what typically happens around the globe during a positive phase Antarctic oscillation. Looking at Brazil, it shows widespread heavy rainfall in center west and southeast Brazil, which is exactly what we've been seeing. But flipping the calendar into March and then the March through May period as a whole, typically that does reverse. So that does show, if you look at the bottom image there, you could see some very dry conditions in portions of the center west, and you don't see high rainfall anywhere in Brazil at least. So anyone that has been looking at this, just something to keep an eye out for if the Antarctic oscillation does remain in a positive phase. Again, not saying that it will, that'll be something we need to keep an eye on. But if it does that, that would sort of reverse things. And that's at least what we're seeing right now. So Argentina, it's kind of a different story. Heavy rainfalls do tend to persist there during a positive phase Antarctic oscillation during March through May, again, which is directly in line with our forecast. So if the Antarctic oscillation stays in this positive phase, it certainly strengthens our forecast there. And then switching gears a little bit from South America to North America, this is our March through May outlook from the same ENSO report. So we are anticipating widespread warmth across most crop regions in the U.S. But more importantly, talking about the precipitation during that time frame, we are anticipating heavy rains in portions of the eastern and southern Midwest. So that could be, a bit of a double-edged sword there with very low soil moistures at the moment. That could definitely help. But at the same time, if it were, extreme in nature, then that could result in some flooding issues and planting delays. So something to keep an eye on. And then with Iowa moving west to South Dakota and Nebraska, we do expect slightly higher than normal totals. So obviously not extreme. And if that were to be the case, then that would certainly help soil moisture levels there ahead of the core, the spring season in the U.S. So kind of just summarizing everything, where we're at now, Argentina and southern Brazil enter March at higher risk for drought based on low soil moisture and rainfall in recent months, while southeast Brazil has the opposite problem amid the extreme rainfall in recent months with flooding issues there. The South America March through May forecast, the wet weather in center west Brazil could favor second crop corn, obviously so long that it isn't extreme and resulting in flooding issues. They have the high soil moisture levels there right now. The dry weather in Goiás would allow for a favorable drawdown for that exact reason, for the oversaturated areas, while the dry weather in southern Brazil could make matters worse there. In Argentina, modest rainfall should prove favorable all around, with a potential trend towards dryness pointing to downside risks like that was highlighted in the EC seasonal outlook. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. And then North America highlights the expected warm and wet weather across much of the U.S. Corn and soybean belts during that time could have mixed impacts, more so with the precipitation. If extreme totals were to materialize in the southern Midwest and the eastern Midwest there, that could lead to planting delays. And areas that experience just modest totals, if that were to trend more towards, just slightly above normal. And that's what we're expecting, at least in the western Midwest and the northern plains. So that should benefit things overall. So that kind of summarizes everything up. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass things over to Dong Soon.
Thanks, Ed. Hello, everyone. This is Dong Soon Choi with Refinitiv Ag Research. I'll be covering the crop outlook portion of today's webinar. Well, as you may all know, both Argentina and Brazil crops have been really struggling with the dry weather over the past few months. Some crop areas actually saw localized flooding as well due to the torrential rains, especially late January. So South America is definitely experiencing some extreme weather patterns this season. Now, the question is, of course, how much impact will they have on yield? How much damage are we talking about? Some are saying it's almost reminiscent of what happened during the infamous 2017-18 season. There are also talks about a possible record low output in southern Brazil and northern Argentina. I'd like to discuss all those issues in this webinar. We have a lot to cover today. Let's dive right in. Okay, first of all, let me very quickly introduce to you what we do, especially for those who joined us for the first time today. We are a group of experts. Every crop analyst in our team is specialized in specific crops and geographies. The crops we cover include corn, soy, wheat, rapeseed, and palm oil, of course, as well as some of the major sugar crops. Our AYP forecasts for all these crops are available on ICON. They are updated every other week, sometimes every week, and they always come with interesting commentaries and insights. Please go ahead and check them out if you haven't already. Here's a flow diagram outlining our methodology for forecasting production. Well, we start the early season by looking at climate connections like ENSO, of course, prices and costs, and some economic trends for area modeling. On the other hand, yield modeling deals with purely physical phenomena. We're supposed to look at soil moisture conditions, and as the season progresses, we utilize weather data, satellite imagery data, and condition scores. Our forecasting is based on using all those data to generate accurate predictions of area and yield through automated modeling processes. We have some dedicated people and specialists in our team working on the technical side. So yeah, this is how we conduct our research. So that was a brief introduction. I'd like to start with Argentina. Let's take a quick look at the vegetation density first. As you may all know, vegetation density basically measures the greenness of the surface. Obviously, the greener the surface, the better crop conditions. We can assume it's probably one of the most widely used indicators to measure the crop growth and the overall healthiness of the crop. Well, the first point I'd like to make here is the drought impact on the early season crops. You can see in November and much of December and January, crops were clearly behind schedule in development. You can see the overall leveling without much increase during that period. At one point, mid-January, it was almost at a record low, after which it made a huge jump thanks to the countrywide precipitation. But then the dryness has returned early February, and the crops are now going through the later half of the growing season, which is my second point. The growing season is really far from over. Most of the later planted corn is still in tapling and fruiting stages. Soybeans are about to enter the pasture. So if dryness continues, the NDVI levels will start plummeting again, which I think might happen given the latest weather forecast. If you look at the province level breakdowns, what stands out at first is that the NDVI levels in the southern regions are surprisingly decent. La Pampa, for example, has been showing consistently above historical median density levels since the beginning of the season. Our yield projections for La Pampa crops are actually near record high for both corn and soy, reflecting this. If you look at Buenos Aires, which is the biggest soy producer and the second biggest corn producer in Argentina, really the NDVI levels there are not too far off the historical trend province-wide. It did have its like ups and downs over the course of the season, but really has not deviated too much from the expectations. Now, the same cannot be said for some of the key northern crop regions, most notably Santa Fe and Entre Rios. Santa Fe's NDVI levels have been hovering around near record lows since January, dragging down the national level yield. Entre Rios is one of the northern provinces that are hit the hardest from the drought. You can see a dramatic recovery late January, but the damage must have been done already. The crops need consistent precipitation, like steady and healthy soil moisture throughout the early season to grow and develop. Too much precipitation in such a short time period can be actually detrimental, even though it can boost topsoil moisture momentarily. Speaking of topsoil moisture, I think this is a great example where you can directly compare this season's levels to those during the famous, like, disastrous 2017-18 season. So what happened at that time was that the initial conditions were actually pretty healthy, as you can see the white curve here, until I would say like early November. That's when Argentina essentially stopped receiving anything, like any rain, for 5 consecutive months. You can see the steep decline from there, a huge reduction in soil moisture from November to March. It started to recover in April. It was too late by then, and the rest is history. Now, Now, let's compare that with the current situation. This season's early soil moisture conditions were actually a lot worse than 2017-18 season. It was consistently worse up until mid-January, when the torrential rains hit the eastern Pampas, causing localized floods and some waterlogging problems. You can see a big jump in the red curve here. The recovery took place much earlier, than quicker than in 2018. So what we can infer from this is that earlier planted corn and the first crop soybeans must have been damaged worse than in 2017-18 season. On the other hand, later planted corn and the second crop soybeans are likely to be in better shape, simply because, after all, soil moisture conditions did recover in time. So, in short, I don't think this season really reminds me of the 2017-18 season. The soil moisture patterns are different, and the crop impact will likely be different. Switching gears, let's go to Brazil now. Soybean harvest progress is always at the center of attention around this time of year, obviously because the second crop corn is planted after soybeans are harvested. As you may well know, hot and dry weather has been the predominant weather pattern, especially in the south and the southeast, adversely affecting crops, but at the same time has allowed soybean harvest and the second crop corn sowings to speed up. As of February 19th, soybeans are 33% harvested nationally, 18% ahead of last year's pace, as well as the 3-year average pace. And thanks to this, the second crop corn is largely progressing on schedule as well, without any delays, unlike last season. So at least as far as harvest and planting progress, things do not look too bad. If you look at some of the major producers, the first thing I noticed again is that the rapid sowing progress in Paraná and Mato Grosso. They both continue to outpace last year's plantings by a wide margin. You can see the gaps between them, and they happen to be the top two second crop corn producing states in Brazil. They produce very little first crop corn. Most of the corn produced there is second crop corn. The season has literally just started. So there are still a lot of uncertainties when it comes to Brazil corn. Another point I'd like to make is that farmers in these regions want to plant their safrinha corn as quickly as possible as soon as the soybeans are harvested. You can see here that the planting windows are very narrow compared to Argentina corn planting windows, for example. The ideal planting window in Mato Grosso do Sul is about the first or second week of March, like the next couple of weeks, essentially, to avoid the possibility of an early frost before the corn gets mature. You can see here how steep the curves are, very little flexibility. So even though plantings have been going well so far, anything can happen in the next couple of weeks. The windows are narrow, and all it takes is really just a couple of inundation events and heavy precipitation events that can disrupt the whole crop cycle with little chance to recover. So those things definitely warrant attention. So dryness has been rather providing decent planting and harvest conditions so far, but at the same time, obviously, it has increased the downside yield risk. I think this NDVI figure is pretty self-explanatory. Severe damage has already been done to the first crop corn and soybeans in the south. You can see the record low levels in Paraná and Rio Grande do Sul since the beginning of the growing season. It will definitely have catastrophic second crop corn yield implications as well if the dryness continues. It's definitely the biggest threat the second corn development going forward. Now, what makes this season different, though, is that the rest of Brazil's main crop regions are doing relatively well. It's really the south that is dragging down the national level yield. So yeah, I mean, we all know the south has been struggling, and will likely continue to struggle, but we don't know for sure how the rest of the crop regions will do going forward. If they are to see, for example, like a good amount of precipitation amid cool weather, it might offset the low yield prospects in the south. If they are not, then the yield there would not be good enough to make up the difference, and the national level numbers will continue to go down. Another major crop region that is not faring well, but much less talked about than the south, is the central or west region. And that is because it was doing really well at the beginning of the season. You can see the record high NDVI levels until mid-January. But then there has been a sudden collapse, a very dramatic one. It literally only took a couple of weeks to go from a record high in mid-January to almost a record low in early February. So you can see this as a simple steep decline, or you can see this as like a dramatic shift of the curve. You know, since as the whole growing window has been shifted leftward. And it makes sense why the second crop corn planting pace is so fast in Mato Grosso and Mato Grosso do Sul. My guess is that we will likely see the second crop corn NDVI curve shift leftward as well, and the whole season could come to an end much sooner than we think. Now the question is, of course, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? Well, as I mentioned earlier, Brazil farmers, they plant the second corn as soon as soybeans are harvested, because they want to avoid the frost risk, the possibility of an early frost in April or May. So it could be a good thing in that regard. But in general, like an abrupt shift of the growth curve is considered to be detrimental, because that means the crop is missing out on the ideal development window that has been naturally established over the years. Mato Grosso and Mato Grosso do Sul are major second corn producers. There's not much first corn grown there, so it will be crucial to see how the crop there responds to the upcoming weather. Now, let's take a look at the weather outlook. From March to May is basically the harvest season in Argentina, and as you can see, the core crop areas of the main Pampas is going to get some rains. Nothing really excessive, but a good amount of above normal precipitation events is likely to take place, which could hinder harvest and other season-ending activities. So that's the risk there. Now, if you look at Brazil and the precipitation pattern there, it's pretty extreme. I think we will continue to see persistent exceptional dryness in the south and likely record low yield in Paraná. On the other hand, like I mentioned earlier, the other major second corn producing states in the central west are expected to receive ample precipitation during March through May, which will definitely help boost soil moisture and maybe yield prospects as well. I would worry more about possible flooding there. So I mean, such a startling contrast, such a split divided pattern, the wet north, dry south pattern, is likely to continue to be the theme throughout the second corn growing season. And again, as I mentioned, I think it's going to be all about like offsetting effect. You know, is the yield potential increase in the central west going to be high enough to offset the likely catastrophic yield collapse in the south? I think that will determine the final national level yield. So these are where we stand at the moment. We have Argentina corn at 49 million tons, well below USDA's 54 million tons. I am sure they will revise their numbers down in March. If you look at the latest Buenos poll results, the average was about 51, with a range of 48 to 53. So ours is below average. As for soy, we are at 41.6. Again, our median estimate is below average, but not the lowest number. Well, obviously, there are more uncertainties for Brazil crops than Argentina crops. In Brazil, the second crop corn season has just started. We'll have to really wait and see how the weather is going to really play out over the next 3 months. Our corn estimates are pretty low. We have 108 million tons for corn and 128.9 for soy. Definitely lower than the average market expectations. Even compared to the local poll results, our numbers are definitely on the lower side. They are among the lowest, actually. So, I think this table is a good summary of our position at the moment. All right, thank you very much. That's all that for today. Now I'm going to let our demand research analyst take over. It's going to cover ag credit flows and some other related topics. Orlando?
Hi, thank you, Don. Hello, everyone. I'm Orlando Rodriguez, a market analyst focused on the demand side of the market, and I will be talking about the wrapping up of the South American 2020-21 season and the export outlook for this 2021-22 season. As you can see in this photo, which is a current shipment from Brazil and Argentina, this photo was taken yesterday, and we just see that a few shipments in the season is about finished. I wanted to mention also that you guys can submit your question in your local language, either Portuguese or Spanish, and we can answer them. So I want to start by mentioning where you can find this new demand side analysis on Icon, and it's under the analysis tab. You click the down arrow, and then you go to the demand side. Currently, we're working on the domestic ethanol use and feed and residual use for the United States, and the export, it's under the flow, since we develop export forecast for Brazil, Argentina, and for the U.S. So this is Refinitiv agriculture trade flows, which provide a vessel-level agricultural commodity flows and aggregated country-to-country imports and exports. So we use this data to develop our analysis and forecast for the agricultural global trading. So let's start with Brazil. Based on these Refinitiv trade flows for the 2020-21 Brazil accumulated corn exports until January total 19.9 million tons, which is 14.5 million tons lower than the previous season. On the right-hand side, we have the seasonal exports, where we can compare the export page from the previous month, and we can see that Brazil exported around 2 million corns this January, and it is slightly below the 5-year average for the month. So the latest Williams vessel lineups reports releasing February 22nd, which is mainly for the Brazil flows, shows that 378,000 metric tons of corn are scheduled to deliver this February. So we'll be hitting 5-year lows this February, which will bring the end up of the 2020-21 total corn exports for Brazil to 20.9 million metric tons. And as you can see in the left images, you can see that this is the lowest in the past 5 years. Our benchmark data here is to our Refinitiv trade for is the Ministry of Development and Industry and Foreign Trade. So let's move to Argentina. So different different than Brazil, which we have of Refinitiv data showing and representing the 95% of the current real-time data. What happens with the data from Argentina is that our trade flows monitor just the dry bulkers and oil tankers shipments only, while the custom data includes all mode of transport, like resulting in potential variation. Besides, there's like a time lag between the departure date and when the cargo is officially recorded as an export. So this changes preliminary data and which official data can lead to some variation here. The benchmark for the Argentina flows data is the National Institute of Statistics and Census. So having said that and looking at our numbers, we project the 2020-21 total core exports in Argentina to close at 39 million metric tons at the end of February, which will be 1.8 below the 3 years average, will be 40.8 million tons. You can see in the right-hand side the monthly data. The blue are the shipments already sold, and the yellow shipment for February, it will be the scheduled shipment for finishing up the season. So this is our global market outlook. Here is how we project this 2021-22 global trade, and we consider the major markets driver from the largest exporter to define each of the forecasts that we develop here. So in the research team, we develop econometric models to predict the exports volume before the season has started, as is happening with Brazil and Argentina, since the export season has not yet started. So we rely on our models. Once the season starts, we adjust our models with the trade flow data, and we conduct pace analysis, giving the Refinitiv trade flow. So as you can see, the major players here are the U.S., Brazil, and Argentina, and Ukraine, the major exporter, and China being a lead importer here. So let's begin with the U.S. Since the U.S. is one of the largest core exporters, this will impact directly in South American upcoming export season. So for the 2021-22 U.S. corn accumulated export closed January at 17.5 million tons, which is 2.9 million tons below the last season until this point. And as of today, the exports are at 21.6 million metric tons, which is 3.9 below the last season. So we have not had the strongest season compared to the last one, because it was a record high season for the U.S. corn export. However, the market indicators are pointing out that the U.S. corn export will get stronger in the upcoming months. The first bullet point would be as Don was mentioned in the South America production losses. This is a huge impact in this case because since the production estimates are lower than they were predicted, so the global market will likely to shift to the U.S. corn. Also, the Chinese demand it's a major impact in the global corn market, and the USDA just raised 13% the pork production forecast. So basically, what China is it's needing more corn, and China it's not going to be able to import as much corn as they will from South America, and also China usually prefer to buy corn from Ukraine. And China has been buying corn from Ukraine. However, given the current situation, the China demand for the U.S. corn has been growing. As you can see, in the China imports, in this chart is the monthly export of U.S. corn by destination. And the last season for the U.S. corn, China was the biggest implicator for hitting record highs. So as you can see, this season, these last months, China's demand for the U.S. corn has been increasing over the years, and we expect with the production losses from South America and the current situation in Ukraine, that the China will get to buy more corn from the U.S. Also, this upcoming U.S. season will be also impacting the 2022-2023 corn harvest season for the U.S. will impact the South American outlook, and this U.S. season will have an impact, of course. So on average, market analysts believe that the U.S. farmers will plant more corn than soy in the 2022, but the spread is close. And I was participating. I was joining the USDA Agriculture Forum today in the morning before this webinar, and they are projecting a record 2020-22 U.S. corn crop and to increase the stocks to comfortable level by the middle of 2020-23. And they'll estimating on average farm price it's seen at $5 per bushel, and they also projecting 92 million acres for the upcoming season for a total of 181 million bushel in total production. So they also are predicting lower export for the 2022-23 season, and so that may push a little bit up the the South American export. So we currently do not have estimates for the 2022-23 season in Refinitiv. However, once we have the number and we'll analyze the market there, and we'll come out with the number. So these market drivers, these market indicators, and the rapid shipping pace and the global supply and demand analysis, so maintain a strong U.S. corn export at 67 million tons for the season for the U.S., which is 5.4 million metric tons above the USDA WATS report that was released on February. As I was mentioning, another major player in the corn market it's Ukraine, and well we sure aware of the current situation from Ukraine. This morning, Russian President Vladimir Putin authorized a special military operation in Ukraine. And so Ukraine, given this current situation, Ukraine has shut down the ports as conflict threatened these grain supplies, and this tension led traders to keep their grains at home rather than shipping it overseas. Ukraine had a major corn harvest this season, and the export pace was up until last week was above the previous season estimates, as you can see in this graph. As I was mentioning, also China, since the China corn demand has been higher, so they was buying a lot of corn from Ukraine. However, we can see this red chart here pointing out in the beginning of this week, these are weekly Ukraine corn exports. Ukrainian exports has been decreased. So the previous forecast at the beginning of the season, given the high Ukraine export season, was higher. However, given the current situation, and we are assessing this market situation here, we have more uncertainties that the U.S. that the East Ukrainian exports are going to be met as projected. So given all the Ukraine difficulties, given that China is having a high demand, and we expect that the 2021-22 corn export forecast for Brazil is 7.9 million metric tons, and for Argentina will be 29.1 metric tons. So the ending stocks will be tight for Brazil. We project 4.46 million metric tons for Brazil, and for Argentina we are estimating 1.92. So depending on the very sensitive upcoming market situation, this stock can get tighter. So this is what we're seeing right now. And based on these market drivers and based on the operational forecast, this is the outlook that we have for the South American outlook. So thank you for your time, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. I want to mention just that these are global maps that are showing in the interactive map in Icon, so you can you can see and track any shipment that you have. This is a current photo taken from export from Brazil and Argentina and going overseas. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Okay, thanks, Orlando. So, well, before we wrap up, I think we have like 30 minutes for questions. We've had one question come in to chat, actually. So the question was about the best criteria for measuring forecasting quality and, the best tools for agricultural planning, short-term and long-term forecast. So I think we're talking about like how methodology, to forecast the area and yield. Well, so for area modeling, so basically we first consider like hundreds of different variables like prices and costs and competing crops, planting progress, like inflation rates, oil prices, things like that. Basically we try to control as many variables as possible. And of course we go through some model selection criteria. Sometimes we develop like sets of independent models, like to fix variables and estimate parameters. The variables used and parameters estimate the changes throughout the season as we obtain more information from the crops. And also, of course, models also can vary from region to region, to crop, depending on additional like available data sources. So yeah, I mean, we are still in the process of refining our approach, but we've had a very encouraging results over the last year and in the past year in forecasting, especially U.S. and Brazil corn and soy acreage and yield so far. I think there's a reason why the acreage is very hard to pin down for anyone, for any analyst. It's fundamentally different than like yield, which deals with, like I said, like purely physical phenomena like weather and soil moisture, soil conditions. They're at least like theoretically like interpretable. When you model area, you model people's behavior, like which is inherently like more unpredictable. It's more about economics than science, because all these planting decisions occur at a very local level, and each household situation is different. Everybody's different, and they all think differently, and not everyone behaves like rationally all the time. Farmers can plant like whatever crop they want to plant, whatever they feel like plant, even if all the external conditions indicate that they are better off planting something else. So the big, like I said, the 4 big categories we look at when you model area are basically like prices and costs, planting progress, and competing crops. So our models incorporate many different variables to increase the predictive power, but it's really inherently impossible to make an accurate prediction on what farmers are really going to do. It's entirely different type of difficulty than trying to estimate yield. So I hope that answered your question. Well, another question just come in to chat. So the question is about Paraguay crops. So how much damage do we think Paraguay corn and soybean crops have sustained from the recent weather extremes? So, the reduction is going to be very big, obviously. Paraguay's, key producing areas are the southeast and oriental region, very close to Paraná in Brazil. So obviously, the severe drought in that area is translating to like mounting losses for producers. We have Paraguay corn at 3.4 million tons and soy at 7 million tons. USDA is at 3.3 for corn and 6.3 for soybeans. That's almost a 10-year low. So, there's no question that they are in a very acute situation right now. I heard something like Paraguay soybean crushing industry, all those local purchasers they're like being forced to import soybeans from Argentina for the first time in history, to cover the local demand. But Argentina is going through their own problems right now. So yeah, I mean, Paraguay is getting looks like they're getting some rains. They're getting some rains here and there as we speak. But it's not going to be nearly enough. It's kind of a little too late anyway. So I think the numbers could continue to go down until the harvest starts in mid-March. So, yeah, very well. I think that's all we've got for today. Please don't forget to check out our updates and upcoming events on icons. Thank you very much. Guilherme, can you take over?
Yes, thank you very much, Dong. Thank you, Ed, Orlando. Very good analysis and insights we had today. Special thanks for all of you who joined us today. You will soon receive the webinar's recording with all of the support content and contacts to learn more about how we can help you and your business. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.